For decades, medicine handed you a simple story about high blood pressure. Too much fluid, too much salt, too much resistance in the pipes. The fix? A pill to drain the excess. Relax the walls. Slow the pump. Clean. Logical. Comforting. Even. I'm Dr. Alex Thompson. I've spent 30 years as a cardiothoracic surgeon not reading about arteries in textbooks, but holding them in my hands. Feeling the difference between tissue that's alive and responsive and tissue that's become something closer to stone. And what I can tell you, with absolute clinical certainty, is this. The pipe model isn't just outdated. It's costing people their lives. Not because the medications don't work. They do partially, temporarily, symptomatically. For millions of people, they prevent strokes. They buy time. I'm not asking you to stop taking them. I'll return to that point, and I'll be direct about it. But here is what those medications were never designed to address. What is happening inside the walls themselves. Your blood pressure cuff measures the force of blood moving through your vessels. What it cannot see, what no standard clinical instrument captures, is the slow biological transformation occurring in the arterial wall tissue. The stiffening, the erosion of the inner protective lining, the calcium migrating to places it was never meant to go, the hormonal signal reaching your kidneys, instructing them to hold on to sodium not because you've eaten too much of it, but because of a metabolic process your doctor may never have mentioned. That's not one problem. That's 4 distinct biological failures, converging simultaneously, all pushing your numbers in the same direction. And here is what cardiovascular research published over the last 15 years has made undeniably clear. Every single one of them is addressable, not managed, not suppressed. Addressed at the level where the damage is actually occurring. What I'm going to walk you through today is the science behind each of these 4 mechanisms, the specific interventions that target them, and the realistic timeline your body needs to respond. This isn't a workaround. It isn't alternative medicine. It is the most current understanding of why blood pressure rises after 60 and what you can actually do about it, starting this week. Here is something that does not appear in any standard patient brochure. Something most people managing blood pressure for 2 decades have never once been told. Something that, once you understand it, reframes everything you thought you knew about why your numbers keep climbing. Inside every artery in your body, every single one, from the major vessels near your heart down to the smallest capillaries in your fingertips, there exists a microscopic protective layer, ultra-thin, invisible to the naked eye. Scientists call it the Glycocalyx. I call it your body's internal armor. Picture the interior of a brand new water pipe, perfectly smooth, frictionless, nothing catching on the walls. That is a healthy Glycocalyx. Blood moves through without resistance. Vessel walls remain supple and responsive. Pressure stays where it belongs. Now picture that same pipe after years of mineral buildup, corrosion, beginning at the edges, the surface roughening incrementally. That is what happens when the Glycocalyx breaks down, and after 60, in most Americans, that breakdown is already well underway. So what is destroying it? The first culprit is blood sugar, and not just at diabetic levels. This is the detail that surprises people most. You don't need a diabetes diagnosis for this damage to be happening. Research published in the journal Circulation established that blood glucose rising above 140 milligrams per deciliter begins actively degrading glycocalyx integrity. Not over years, but within hours of a single spike. That bowl of white pasta at dinner, the glass of orange juice at breakfast, the crackers you didn't think twice about. Each one is a small erosion event. Repeated daily, across years. The cumulative damage is profound. The second culprit is oxidative stress, the biological equivalent of rust accumulating faster than your body can scrub it away. Fragmented sleep, low-grade chronic inflammation, a diet built around processed convenience foods. Each of these conditions floods your cells with molecular waste products that the Glycocalyx cannot withstand indefinitely. By the time most people reach their late 60s, this layer has been quietly deteriorating for years, often decades, without a single symptom to announce it. And here is where the danger compounds itself. When the Glycocalyx erodes, the arterial wall beneath it becomes exposed, raw, inflamed. Your body's surveillance systems detect that damage and trigger an emergency pressure response, constricting vessels, raising force in an attempt to compensate for the compromised infrastructure. It is trying to protect you, but the protection itself becomes the pathology. Your blood pressure isn't rising because something external attacked you. It's rising because your body is desperately compensating for damage. It has been quietly accumulating for years. Damage that begins at a layer so small it took electron microscopes to discover it. That layer can be rebuilt. And that is exactly where we start. Now here is where the conversation shifts, and I want you to pay close attention to this part, because this is where most health content fails you. It describes the problem in vivid detail, leaves you thoroughly alarmed, and then offers you nothing actionable. That is not what we are doing here. The glycocalyx is not scar tissue. It is not a permanent casualty of age. It is a living, dynamic structure, and given the right biological conditions, it regenerates. The research on this is consistent and, frankly, more encouraging than most physicians have had the time to communicate. Here is how you begin. First, stabilize your blood sugar, not obsessively, but strategically. You are not being asked to count every gram of carbohydrate for the rest of your life. What the research does ask is that you become deliberate about the specific triggers: white bread, sweetened beverages, packaged snack foods, refined grains that convert to glucose almost immediately upon digestion. These are the inputs producing those damaging post-meal spikes. Replace them, consistently, and without drama, with whole foods that digest slowly. Legumes, vegetables, foods that work with your metabolism rather than against it. Every meal that doesn't spike your glucose is a meal that gives your glycocalyx time to recover. Second, eat deliberately for polyphenols. These plant-based compounds concentrated in dark berries, leafy greens, high-quality extra virgin olive oil, and properly brewed green tea have been shown in multiple studies to directly support glycocalyx repair. The mechanism involves reducing oxidative damage at the vessel wall itself, essentially giving your body's internal maintenance crew the materials it needs to rebuild what daily life has been eroding. This is not supplementation as an afterthought. This is targeted nutritional intervention with a specific biological endpoint. Third, consider fucoidan. This is the one most people have never encountered. Fucoidan is a sulfated polysaccharide derived from brown seaweed, and it has become one of the most rigorously studied natural compounds for glycocalyx support. Its molecular structure closely resembles components of the glycocalyx itself, which is precisely why researchers began investigating it. The evidence is still developing, but what exists is compelling enough that I discuss it with patients managing cardiovascular risk. Does all of this feel like a significant shift? I understand if it does. So let me give you the single smallest entry point available: a generous handful of fresh blueberries. Every morning, without exception. That one habit sustained, not heroic, delivers meaningful polyphenol exposure, begins reducing post-meal oxidative stress, and starts the glycocalyx repair process on a timeline your body can actually work with. You do not need to overhaul your life this week. You need to begin it. The biology will follow. Let me take you into the operating room for a moment. You have opened the chest. You have reached the aorta, the great vessel, the main highway of the human circulatory system. And instead of the supple, resilient tissue you are expecting, what you encounter feels closer to porcelain, rigid, unyielding, a structure that was designed to flex with every heartbeat, now incapable of movement. I have stood in that position hundreds of times, and every time, the clinical term feels inadequate for what you are actually holding. That is arterial calcification. And it is far more common and far more correctable than most people over 60 have ever been told. Here is the critical misunderstanding. This is not caused by consuming too much calcium. Your dietary choices are not the primary villain here. What you are witnessing is a delivery failure calcium that your body intended for your bones arriving instead at your arterial walls and staying there. Your body produces a protein called matrix protein MGP, whose precise biological function is to intercept calcium in the bloodstream and route it towards skeletal tissue, away from vascular tissue. It is a molecular traffic controller, and when it is functioning correctly, your arteries remain clear. But MGP only operates when it is activated. And the activating agent is vitamin K2, specifically the form designated MK7. This is where the gap becomes consequential. K2 is not abundant in the standard American diet. It exists in meaningful quantities in fermented foods, most notably natto, a traditional Japanese preparation of fermented soybeans, and in certain aged cheeses. The average person over 60 is significantly deficient in it. often without any indication that this deficiency is silently redirecting calcium into the vessel walls that blood pressure depends on remaining flexible. The Rotterdam Heart Study, one of the most comprehensive long-term cardiovascular investigations ever conducted in Europe, found that participants with the highest K2 intake showed dramatically lower rates of arterial calcification, not K1, the form found abundantly in leafy greens. K2 specifically. The distinction is not a minor technicality. It is the entire mechanism. Now add magnesium to this picture. You have likely heard of calcium channel blockers, among the most frequently prescribed blood pressure medications in America. Their function is to prevent calcium from entering the smooth muscle cells lining your artery walls, keeping those walls from contracting too forcefully. Magnesium performs a remarkably similar function through entirely natural means, competing with calcium at the cellular level, maintaining arterial relaxation, reducing vascular resistance. A meta-analysis consolidating data from more than 30 clinical trials confirmed that magnesium supplementation produces measurable reductions in both systolic and diastolic pressure, and studies indicate that up to 70% of adults over 60 are deficient in it. The protocol is precise. K2, MK7 daily, magnesium glycinate, vitamin D3 to optimize absorption of both, 3 compounds, 1 coordinated biological correction, and arterial walls that can finally begin releasing what they have been holding for decades. I want to tell you about a gas, not a supplement, not a pharmaceutical compound with a 16-syllable name. A gas, a molecule so architecturally simple, so vanishingly small, that it passes directly through cell walls without asking permission. And without sufficient quantities of it circulating in your body right now, no blood pressure medication on Earth can fully compensate for what is missing. It is called nitric oxide, and its discovery was considered so consequential that the scientists who identified its cardiovascular role were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1998. Here is what it does with elegant simplicity. When nitric oxide reaches the smooth muscle tissue embedded in your arterial walls, those muscles release. The vessel opens. Blood moves through with dramatically less resistance. Pressure falls naturally, immediately, without chemical intervention. It is your body's own built-in pressure relief system, the mechanism that every vasodilating medication on the market is attempting, artificially, to replicate. And after 60, your body is producing significantly less of it than it once did. The decline is not random. Several specific, largely overlooked factors are actively accelerating it. Low physical activity, a diet short on nitrate-rich vegetables, chronic mouth breathing. And this is the one that genuinely stops people antibacterial mouthwash used twice daily. Your oral cavity harbors specialized bacteria whose function is to convert dietary nitrates into nitric oxide. Antibacterial mouthwash eliminates them indiscriminately. A habit you have maintained for years in the name of hygiene may be quietly suppressing one of your most critical cardiovascular molecules. It is worth a conversation with your physician. Now here is how you rebuild it. And I want you to notice that none of what follows requires a gym membership, athletic conditioning, or equipment beyond what you already own. Isometric hand grip exercise. Take a rolled towel, a tennis ball, or an inexpensive grip device. Squeeze at approximately 30% of your maximum effort firm, not forceful. Hold for 2 minutes. Rest for 2 minutes. Repeat 4 times. 3 sessions per week. A review published in the Journal of the American Heart Association documented an average reduction of 10 points in systolic blood pressure from this protocol alone. You can perform every repetition seated in your living room chair. Breathe through your nose deliberately and consistently. Your nasal passages are lined with tissue that actively synthesizes nitric oxide with every inhalation. Research confirms that nasal breathing increases circulating nitric oxide by up to 400% compared to mouth breathing. The intervention costs nothing. It requires only awareness. Eat for nitrates. Beetroot, spinach, arugula, celery. These are among the most concentrated dietary sources available. Clinical trials on daily beetroot juice consumption have produced results compelling enough to appear in peer-reviewed cardiovascular literature. 3 interventions. 0 prescriptions. 1 molecule. Your body already knows exactly how to use, if you give it the raw materials to produce it. Most people believe their kidneys are simple filters. Passive, mechanical. Blood goes in, waste comes out. and the organ asks nothing complicated of the rest of your body. What actually happens is considerably more sophisticated, and for millions of adults over 60 managing stubbornly elevated blood pressure, considerably more consequential. Here's what your kidneys are doing right now. They are continuously sampling your bloodstream, making real-time decisions about which minerals to retain and which to release. Sodium specifically is being held or expelled based on a cascade of hormonal signals arriving from elsewhere in the body. And when insulin enters that conversation chronically, as it does in the presence of insulin resistance, which quietly affects the majority of older Americans, the signal your kidneys receive is unambiguous. Hold the sodium. Do not release it. Retained sodium draws water. Accumulated water expands blood volume. Expanded blood volume inside a fixed arterial system produces exactly one outcome: higher pressure. This is the kidney-insulin connection. It is among the most under-recognized drivers of treatment-resistant hypertension in older adults. And it explains something that frustrates patients profoundly. You have reduced your salt intake conscientiously. You have read every nutrition label. Your sodium consumption is genuinely modest, and your blood pressure remains immovable, because the salt you are eating is not the primary problem. The salt your kidneys are refusing to release is chronically elevated insulin compounds this through a second simultaneous mechanism activating your sympathetic nervous system, the biological architecture of fight-or-flight response. Vessels constrict, heart rate climbs, two damaging cardiovascular effects, both originating from a single metabolic root, and neither one addressed by standard antihypertensive medication. The first intervention is timing. The 16-to-8 protocol, confining your eating to an 8-hour window and allowing 16 hours without caloric intake, produces a sustained, meaningful drop in circulating insulin levels. During that fasting window, the hormonal pressure on your kidneys lifts. They begin releasing what they have been accumulating. A study published in Cell Metabolism demonstrated measurable blood pressure reductions from time-restricted eating alone, with no modifications whatsoever to diet, composition, or caloric intake. The timing was the entire variable. One important note: if your current medications require food for safe administration, or if you have any history of hypoglycemia, discuss this approach with your physician before beginning. The second intervention is muscle. Skeletal muscle is the body's largest insulin-sensitive tissue, and every contraction under resistance pulls glucose from your bloodstream through a pathway that completely bypasses insulin signaling. It circumvents the resistance rather than attempting to overcome it. Resistance bands, body weight movements, light dumbbells. 2 sessions weekly is sufficient to begin shifting insulin sensitivity within weeks. More functional muscle means more efficient glucose clearance, lower circulating insulin, kidneys that finally receive permission to release what they have been holding, blood pressure descending from a mechanism no prescription was ever written to reach. I need to be direct with you about something, because this is precisely where most people quietly abandon a protocol that was actually beginning to work. They start with magnesium, or the hand grip exercise, or they switch to nasal breathing for 11 days. Nothing dramatic announces itself on the blood pressure cuff. And they conclude, reasonably but incorrectly, that the approach has failed them. It has not failed them. They have misunderstood the architecture of what they are working with. These 4 mechanisms are not a menu. They are not independent interventions you sample individually and evaluate in isolation. They are a biological system, interconnected, mutually reinforcing, each one influencing the performance of every other. And systems do not respond to partial commitment the way a single variable does. Consider the cascade. When the glycocalyx erodes, the inflammatory response it triggers accelerates calcium misrouting into arterial walls. Calcified, stiffened arteries lose their capacity to produce and respond to nitric oxide. Depleted nitric oxide deepens insulin resistance, and insulin resistance loops back, damaging the glycocalyx further, retaining more sodium, constricting vessels that are already struggling. It is a circle, and the only way to interrupt a circle is to apply pressure at multiple points simultaneously. Here is the timeline the research actually supports, and the one I share with every patient. Nitric oxide responds first. Within days to 2 weeks of consistent isometric exercise and deliberate nasal breathing, many people register a measurable shift. This is the earliest signal that the system is responding. Magnesium and insulin sensitivity follow. 2 to 4 weeks of sustained nutritional correction and time-restricted eating begin producing changes visible in both blood pressure readings and metabolic markers. Glycocalyx regeneration and meaningful calcification reversal Occupy a longer horizon, 3 to 6 months of uninterrupted, consistent effort. Not perfect effort, consistent effort. There is an important distinction between those two things. This is not a 7-day protocol designed to produce a dramatic before and after. Those do not exist in cardiovascular biology, regardless of what certain corners of the internet would prefer you believe. What the research describes and what I have observed clinically is a genuine, measurable, biological repair process unfolding across a timeline proportional to the damage being addressed. You did not develop hypertension in a week. The glycocalyx did not erode overnight. Calcium did not migrate into your arterial walls across a single month. These processes accumulated quietly across years, sometimes decades, before a blood pressure cuff finally registered their consequence. Reversing them requires the same respect for biological time. Give your body the same patience and sustained commitment you would give any serious healing process. Because that is precisely what this is. Serious healing, happening at a level most medicine never reaches. And it is already available to you. Before we go any further, I need to stop and say something plainly, because if I don't, someone watching this will make a decision that could cost them everything. Do not stop your blood pressure medication. Not tomorrow morning. Not after 2 weeks of feeling noticeably better. Not because your home monitor showed a reading that encouraged you. Not for any reason, on any timeline, without explicit guidance from the physician who prescribed it. I want to be precise about why I am saying this with such directness, because this is not a standard disclaimer inserted to satisfy a legal requirement. This is clinical reality speaking from 3 decades of surgical experience. I have been present when hypertensive crises announce themselves without warning. I have seen what uncontrolled pressure does to a brain, the hemorrhage, the sudden catastrophic loss of function that arrives in an instant and reshapes everything that follows. I have held hearts damaged by years of pressure that was never adequately managed. I have watched kidneys fail in ways that are neither gradual nor forgiving. These are not abstractions. They are outcomes. And they are outcomes that blood pressure medication, imperfect and incomplete as it may be, exists specifically to prevent. Your medication is not the enemy of this protocol. It is the safety infrastructure that keeps you protected while your biology does the slower, deeper work of genuine repair. Think of it as the scaffolding surrounding a building under restoration. The scaffolding is not the solution, the renovation happening inside the walls is. But you do not remove the scaffolding while the renovation is still in progress. Here is what the protocol I have described is designed to accomplish over time. As your glycocalyx regenerates, as calcium begins routing correctly, as nitric oxide production is restored, as your kidneys finally release their hormonal grip on sodium, your numbers will reflect those changes. Authentically, measurably. Not because a medication has suppressed a symptom, but because the underlying biological conditions driving the pressure have been genuinely corrected. At that point, with documented evidence in hand, with a blood pressure log showing sustained improvement, with blood work reflecting metabolic change, the conversation about medication adjustment becomes not only appropriate, but medically supported. Some patients reach a place where their physician, reviewing the full clinical picture, determines that dosage reduction is warranted. Some reach it further along than others. Every cardiovascular history is individual, and the trajectory is never identical across 2 patients. But that conversation belongs in a physician's office, not in a moment of personal optimism following a promising week of readings. Bring this information to your doctor. Engage with it actively and specifically. Ask whether vitamin K2, MK7 is appropriate given your current medication regimen. Certain blood thinners interact with vitamin K in ways that require monitoring, and your physician needs to be part of that evaluation. Ask about magnesium glycinate, whether your current kidney function and medication profile make it a suitable addition. Ask explicitly about isometric exercise and whether your cardiovascular status supports that protocol. Ask about time-restricted eating and how it intersects with any medications that require food for safe administration. These are not passive questions. They are the questions of someone who has moved from being a recipient of medical decisions to an active, informed participant in their own cardiovascular outcome. And that distinction between passive recipient and active participant is one of the most significant predictors of long-term health outcomes that exist in the clinical literature. Informed patients ask better questions. Better questions produce more complete clinical conversations. More complete conversations lead to treatment plans that address more of the picture. And treatment plans that address more of the picture produce better outcomes. This is not philosophy. It is documented across decades of patient outcome research. You have spent years, perhaps decades, being handed a prescription and a set of numbers to monitor. That model served a purpose, but you are capable of something more sophisticated than passive compliance. And your cardiovascular system will respond to that sophistication if you apply it consistently and collaboratively. The biology I have described today is not theoretical. It is not speculative. It is the current, peer-reviewed understanding of why blood pressure behaves the way it does after 60, and what the human body is genuinely capable of when it receives the right conditions for repair. Your medication keeps you safe while that repair unfolds. Your physician guides the process with the clinical context only they possess. And you informed, engaged, consistent, are the one who determines whether the repair actually happens. That has always been the most important variable in the room. I want to leave you with an image that I have carried with me since my earliest years in the operating room because it captures, more precisely than any clinical summary, what the difference between intervention and inaction actually looks like inside a human body. Picture two arteries. Same patient age, same blood pressure number on the chart, same diagnosis, written in the same medical shorthand, identical on paper in every way that standard medicine typically measures. Inside, they are two entirely different biological environments. The first artery is rigid, its inner walls roughened, chronically inflamed, the glycocalyx reduced to a fraction of its protective capacity. Calcium has been accumulating in the wall tissue for years, uncorrected, unrouted, transforming what should be supple living tissue into something closer to calcified stone. Nitric oxide production has fallen to levels insufficient to maintain meaningful vasodilation. The medication managing this patient's numbers is doing precisely what it was designed to do and nothing more. The pressure on the gauge looks acceptable. The arterial wall beneath that reading tells a completely different story. The second artery began in exactly the same condition. Same damage, same history, same starting point in every measurable respect. But 6 months ago, something changed. The glycocalyx began receiving the nutritional inputs it needed to regenerate. Calcium started arriving at bone tissue instead of arterial walls. Nitric oxide production was restored through interventions requiring no prescription and no equipment beyond a rolled towel. The kidneys, released from chronic insulin signaling, began clearing sodium they had been hoarding for years. The pressure dropped, not because a medication suppressed it, but because the biological conditions producing it were systematically corrected. Same diagnosis, completely transformed internal reality. That transformation is not a medical miracle. It is physiology responding to accurate information delivered consistently over time. The damage I have witnessed across 3 decades in the operating theater almost never arrived suddenly. It assembled itself quietly year by year, meal by meal, missed signal by missed signal until the accumulation finally became impossible to ignore. By that point, the options available are considerably more limited than they were earlier in the process. You are here now. That means the process is still in motion and still interruptible. Here is everything you need to carry forward from today. Step 1. Rebuild your glycocalyx. Eliminate refined carbohydrates as a daily default. Add polyphenol-rich foods, consistently dark berries every morning, leafy greens, high-quality extra virgin olive oil. Begin with the blueberries. Build from there. Step 2. Correct your calcium routing. Vitamin K2, MK7 daily, combined with magnesium glycinate and vitamin D3. These 3 compounds work as a coordinated system routing calcium to bone, relaxing arterial walls, optimizing absorption. None of them work in isolation as effectively as they work together. Step 3. Restore your nitric oxide. Isometric hand grip exercise. 3 sessions weekly. Nasal breathing. Practice deliberately until it becomes habitual. Beetroot, spinach, arugula incorporated regularly into your meals. Simple inputs producing a profound molecular outcome. Step 4. Break the kidney-insulin trap. Time-restricted eating within an 8-hour window, allowing insulin levels to fall during the remaining 16 hours. 2 to 3 sessions of light resistance training weekly, building the muscle tissue that clears glucose independently of insulin signaling. None of this requires suffering. None of it demands perfection. It requires understanding what is actually happening inside your cardiovascular system and making consistent choices that work with that biology, rather than simply overriding its symptoms. Your heart has been contracting reliably, without interruption, without recognition, without ever requesting anything from you in return. Since before you drew your first breath, it has accompanied every moment of your life with absolute fidelity. It deserves a response equal to that commitment. Everything shared here reflects current cardiovascular research and 3 decades of clinical observation. It is general information, not a replacement for the personalized medical guidance of the physician who knows your complete history, your current medications, and the specific details of your case. Before modifying any treatment plan, have that conversation with your doctor. That is not a disclaimer placed here for legal protection. That is the most important step in the entire protocol.